Let's now move on to the core section of today's program, which is a continuation of the prior episode regarding the destructive nature of economic competition in particular, in contrast to the capitalist mythology alluded to earlier that says competition is the mechanism of balance, efficiency, and of course, freedom in society. The modern competitive sickness is not just an interpersonal or intergroup phenomenon. The very basis of our economy has forced us to be at war with nature itself. It might seem a little strange to phrase it that way, but it's completely accurate. Market economics only sees the earth as an inventory to exploit for its infinite growth requirements. This means it holds the habitat in contempt, as there is no respect for regenerative balance or homeostasis. Carl Sagan once said, "An organism at war with itself is doomed." It's bad enough we sit at the edge of apocalyptic violence on this planet by way of military establishments, but our complete disharmony with the habitat through the competitive, exploitative, economic system moves us toward the exact same end. Thirdly, one thing I find that people tend to refuse to accept when it comes to understanding the nature of market and business competition is that it is that very incentive that leads to government corruption, particularly in the context of shutting down needed business regulation. And I don't mean just environmental regulation, which is obvious, but also regulatory intervention that tries to help those people that end up on the wrong side of market imbalance, hence the poor, and those suffering from the structural violence of low socioeconomic status. A reality that literally kills millions and millions each year. As an aside, make no mistake, poverty as a general term is the leading cause of death on Earth, a slow-motion genocide born from systemic processes of the market economy. In fact, as weird as this may sound to many, poverty did not even exist on this planet in its true technical nature before the utilization of trade-based society. Why? Because with the exception of absolute poverty, meaning the lack of nutrition and things that directly inhibit your biology, all other forms of poverty are socially relative. That noted, when it comes to overall government corruption, everyone always says the same thing, right? Get money out of politics. What a naive and absurd thing to say when your entire society is run by money and markets. It is the exact same competitive function that keeps businesses trying to outdo and stifle each other in the business game that incentivizes fighting back any regulatory interference on the part of government. It is fascinating how the activist community can't get a handle on that yet. In fact, the general public at large tends to accept the basis of competition in business as a good thing, but draws the red line when this competitive ethic enters into the relationship between business and government. I'm sorry, but this is just what the incentive structure does, which is why at the foundation of things today, lobbying is completely legal, and corporate lobbyists outnumber lawmakers 10 to 1 here in the United States, many of them writing the actual laws that policymakers put forward. A fundamentally business-run government is what you have, and that is a result of the competitive intent built into the market ecosystem. Don't want that to happen? Well, I guess you could try to outlaw such things as the common logic goes. But wait a minute, if laws are written essentially by policymakers as they are influenced by money, why would those people write laws to remove that influence? See the problem? And obviously, I'm being purposefully rhetorical here, but the truth remains. Naive. Okay, moving on. The fourth issue we need to get out of the way when it comes to the overall dysfunction of a competitive society is the integrity of information itself, including cherished scientific consensus. So much of what we have been led to believe about the world, told it was arrived at through the method of science, has been utterly wrong. Not wrong in the context of natural falsifiability of things over time and the march of scientific progress, as obviously everything is going to change in our understanding over time. No, I'm referring to very specific problems of incentive distortions, where profit-seeking entities, whether an individual or an entire industry, willfully promote biased science because it helps their bottom line. And the problem is twofold. First, you have the direct problem of fraud or the willingness to not be completely truthful, manipulating data for self-interest, such as the oil industry has been doing for many decades regarding how hydrocarbons affect the ecosphere. Or we can go back to the food pyramid that was taught to people like myself in elementary school, which was literally constructed by corporations as a marketing gimmick, polluting the lives of millions and millions of children. Point being, it's been well established that even prominent scientific journals have been infiltrated to promote such bias by corporate influence, making the necessity for skepticism essential in areas, we just hoped we could kind of trust once again as a scientific outcome. And there's no shortage of examples with that in all areas. Secondly, since this awareness of historical manipulation exists, it pushes people to reactionarily, to impulsively mistrust scientific consensus itself as a kind of impulsive reaction. Not critical skepticism through thought and research, but a rejection born from cynicism, again from mistrust. In other words, since there is precedent for corruption, they just assume corruption will be consistent. And it's very dangerous to have that kind of attitude float around society, particularly in the modern era. A massive trust problem, which is deeply polluting. And as an aside, we are all familiar with this terrible pejorative that has swept modern culture, the phrase conspiracy theorist. It's fascinating to hear this term used so passively now, as if it's some kind of technical distinction of perspective. Even some of the most professional appearing news organizations now use this phrase, not understanding that what they are actually doing is engaging in a kind of impulsive insolence and intellectual bigotry, if you will. What they're actually saying is that someone is either dumb or insane for their view in fear of some kind of ulterior element behind a given phenomenon. It's right up there with the vague use of terms like socialist or communist as descriptive pejoratives, fundamentally meaningless, abstracted, subjective terms, apart from relatively getting across the idea that a person or an idea itself is to be debased in a given context and having no validity or integrity. I wrote about this a bit in an article on Substack dealing with conspiracy culture. Anyone can go and read it. And here's the question: where do people think this social paranoia comes from? Where do people think this enormous mistrust of power and institutions find a psychological root? It's very obvious. It's rooted in a kind of emotional reaction based upon blind skepticism of our society at large and its behavior, hence our social system, because everyone in this system is constantly manipulating everything on different scales for their own personal or group advantage, at the expense of others, inevitably. That is just what the capitalist system does. And in a climate where everyone is fundamentally dishonest and angling at all times, of course you're going to have pockets, I should say, of mass exaggeration, of irrational causality, a consensus that just assumes the worst and inventing things that don't even exist. Of course you're going to have that. Of course you're going to have QAnon. Of course you're going to have flat earthers. And of course you're going to have exploiters like Alex Jones shamelessly profiting off of the most extreme ideas, culminating this societal skepticism in a feedback loop. And as far as I'm concerned, it's all a side effect, once again, of the inherently competitive nature of our society. I'm not saying this is the only reason people believe stupid things, of course, but it's made that much worse by the ecosystem of mistrust that is inherent to our social system. Governments of the world don't just lie occasionally. They lie as a matter of practice, as do all corporations. Have you ever heard of advertising? The system is premised in a strategic game of manipulation, which again is why Donald Trump will be the next president. He is the archetype of a kind of con artist mentality that the system rewards, and hence why people will support him, because that's the way they are trained to think as well.